Welcome back to the show. I hope everybody had a wonderful holiday season. Here we are, early January, about to get after it again. I know many of you hopefully got to enjoy some time off and you're getting back in the groove of things. And man, do we have an episode to launch 2026 for you. I'm going to tell you about that in just a few minutes. But over the holidays and over the break, is always a time for our company to kind of see the successes of the previous year. And man, did we get some this year. You may have seen the lead article in IECP's last newsletter about the Cleveland Police Department increasing their applications 356%. We'll link an article based on that, but obviously they've been a great client with ours. We've really enjoyed partnering with them. And by the way, we'll give them the credit. I mean, we are partnering with them and we've given them a lot of things to do and they've said yes to a lot of those things, but they're doing the hard work. I mean, we don't want to make it seem like people can just hire us and walk away. Cleveland PD hired us about 9 months ago and they have worked extremely hard in that time period. And so we give the credit to them, but it really was nice to see them get a lot of credit around the country. We saw numerous articles pop up based on that one article that IECP ran. Also, Philadelphia Police Department announced a 287% increase in hires. Now, we've, of course, worked with Philadelphia for the last couple of years. Captain John Walker has been on this show. And by the way, they came 2 hires away from breaking their all-time hiring record. And that is tremendous based on where they came from. And Captain Walker talked a lot about that on this very show. I'll link that up as well. But once again, it's an honor to partner with them, but Captain Walker has put a team together that's putting in the hard work. And if you want to hear about what those agencies did to make that happen, and by the way, quickly, Philadelphia within 6 months started turning around. And Cleveland, within the last 6 months, has just been on fire. In fact, just a quick story is we told Cleveland early on, we're going to staff you full. And I'm not sure they really believed us, but we're on the verge of it. Actually, they're on the verge of it. And once again, I want to reiterate, we're not sitting here taking a victory lap for ourselves. We're just bragging on these agencies that have taken a different approach to recruiting, done some things a little bit differently. And we've just been able to go along with the ride and partner with them. Of course, a couple weeks ago, you heard from another guest on this show of a client of ours he's increased his hiring interviews, Larimer County, Colorado, 3X. He's going to go for 5X this year. And by the way, you're going to wonder, well, what's that costing him? It's less than any hiring bonus for one person you've ever heard of. Actually, way less. I don't want to reveal it, but it's just not a lot of money. They put in a lot of work. And of course, they have our software, which is what they talked about on the podcast. And so check those out. You can just go back to a few podcasts and you can check those out. But really, really happy about that. We have a huge article come out in Police One here in the next few days. Follow us on social media. We will post that. But we're very honored to be able to partner with them as well and to start talking about even more people about recruiting. So today's guest, you're going to love today's guest. There's probably not anybody in this profession that is tuned in to so many different topics than Vaughn Kliem with Force Science. He's the president of communications there. I've known Vaughn for many, many years. And man, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to retention, when it comes to what other agencies are doing across the country, he is tuned in. You're going to love the interview. I love talking to him. We'll have him back again, but you don't want to miss this one. So without further ado, here's Vaughn. Well, it's our honor to welcome Vaughn Kliem here on the show. He has over 30 years of experience in the criminal justice field. He's held positions all the way from patrol officer to drug investigator to use of force instructor, street level supervisor, parole investigator, jailer. He's got legal positions, including chief prosecutor, special victims counsel, police legal advisor, senior policy attorney, military magistrate, special assistant to the U.S. attorney, and much more. But he's currently the president and director of communications with Force Science. It's an incredible honor. And Vaughn has probably talks to more law enforcement agencies across the country than almost anybody. So we thought he'd be a great addition here on the show to discuss
leadership, recruiting, retention, all that goes into that. Vaughn, how are you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. And hey, Travis, thanks a lot for inviting me. I've been watching your show. I've been impressed with the work you're doing, and it is absolutely an honor to sit here with you today.
Well, we try to give this content to law enforcement because we keep hearing this routine of there's a recruiting crisis and this is going on and this is going on. My issue with that has always been if we just call it a crisis, it gives us an excuse. We don't see that at all. We see plenty of people that want to go into the profession. Obviously, not every agency is the same. Just what's your thoughts? You're speaking to officers across the country. You're speaking to agencies across the country. What are you hearing from them, Vaughn?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because obviously things are changing now, but the response to it shouldn't change. And what I mean by that is when we were seeing the huge recruiting problem, and I talked to a buddy the other day who's in recruiting. He's like, we don't have to actively recruit very hard right now. We again have applicants lining up around the block because they like the political environment, right? And what he was specifically talking about is we just went through a phase where our politicians and our leaders were trying to convince the country that cops were racist, abusive, and corrupt. Well, that's a problem because if you're trying to recruit people into an industry, you need to cast a vision for them, right? That was the strategy. How do you cast a vision that they can see themselves in, right? And it has to be an honorable vision, and depending on who the individual is, it could be one of courage or one of communication or one of we look at police departments like a baseball team, right? Not everybody's a pitcher, not everybody's a right fielder, but everybody's on the team. Yep. And so we look for their skill set and we plug it in. That was part of the recruiting. We looked at their attributes, we looked at their skill sets, and we cast a vision for them. And then we showed them how they could get there. Well, the vision that was being cast was you're racist, abusive, and corrupt. Nobody's lining up for that. The people who wanted to be cops couldn't raise their hand with that as the backstop. The other side of that was if you want to become a cop, understand that cops are systemically racist. This was what was being beaten into everybody's head. So if you want to go into that industry, you have to go in there with an anti-racist mentality, which meant you had to deconstruct all institutions of racism, policing being one of them, and you had to deconstruct it from inside. And so they were seeing applicants who were basically social justice activists who wanted to become cops so that they could dismantle that system of oppression from the inside. Well, the traditional law and order guys who were in the agency had no idea what to do with that, right? But yeah, that's who was actually signing up or willing to come and sign up to be cops at the time. That's pivoted. I've seen it pivot. I think you've probably seen it pivot. In a conversation 2 nights ago with a recruiter, they're able to cast a vision of honor, courage, commitment, selfless service, sacrifice. They're able to cast a vision of hey, we run towards the sound of gunfire. We stop the bleeding. We start the breathing. If you want to be courageous and you want to be physically strong and intelligent and you want a job that requires those attributes, you just found it, right? That's what policing is. So that was sort of what the challenges I saw was, and I think some of that's been eliminated. And when I started with, so the strategy doesn't have to change. They still now get to cast a vision, but they can do it with optimism, and they can do it with a little bit of confidence that the political leadership is not going to as aggressively or overtly, or I should say openly and notoriously demonize the police profession in this current political culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you described there is mission-based, right? If you stick with your mission, and it's easy to know what the law enforcement mission is, it's in our name, law enforcement. There's always going to be people that want to do that job. There's just people inherently that want to do that job. But I think as you described, as we got away from that mission to, I don't even know what that was, things went kind of haywire. It kind of takes me back to, it was 3 or 4 years ago when the military wasn't hitting their recruiting levels, which was a problem. It's a national security problem. And they were having meetings on Capitol Hill, and Army and Navy and Space Force. They're all given big bonuses and they're trying to give all these incentives. They weren't hitting their recruiting numbers, but the Marine Corps was, and they got the head of the Marine Corps, and I apologize, you probably know this, Vaughn, Colonel or whatever his name, whatever the rank of the head guy is. Yeah. He testified in front of a Congress, and they said, we don't understand this. You don't offer any bonuses. You don't offer any more incentives. Why are you hitting your recruiting goal, but none of the other branches are? And he just simply said, because we promised they can be a U.S. Marine.
Right.
So he stick to his mission. And so, and I tell you, we've run across this with some of our clients, Vaughn, and we've had some deep conversations with them. Like during that time period you talked about, they were actually trying to recruit based on that. Hey, come in here and you can change this profession. Come in here. We acknowledge our mistakes of the past, but we need you to come help us. And here's a shocker. It wasn't working for them.
No.
They were either getting people that weren't fitting in their culture or being able to actually do law and order, or they weren't getting anybody on. In fact, the biggest answer is they weren't really getting anybody. And as soon as we would shift their ads and shift their language to the mission, it just started working. And so I'm with you. I hope it has shifted, but I would caution everybody listening. It's not like that stuff's gone away. It's just not as politically expedient now to be that way today than it was then. Trust me, it's still there. And just what's your thoughts on that? Because, we've talked about a lot of these issues, you and I, Vaughn, off microphone here. And that's what's so frustrating to me, because I feel like law enforcement just expects the pendulum's always going to swing back, is the famous words, right? Pendulum's always going to swing back. Well, when it comes to recruiting, we're probably never going to see the masses of people trying to get into a department that we once did. I mean, I tested with 1,000 people for 9 spots. I think I'm sure you have a similar story. But we can get enough people if we just kind of stick to those core issues. Speak to the mission, speak to honor, speak to courage, speak to what the job's actually about, not what people are saying it's about. What's your thoughts on that?
No, you just nailed it. Like, if all they have to do is accurately describe what the job is, they do not. And this is a nice transition to the question, to your question, which is, what do leaders need to be doing? Well, they need to be honest about the reality of the job as compared to how it's being described by the political leaders. And so how many people stood up and they said, we need to change the culture of policing, right? And I said, and you've probably heard me say this, I've said it loudly and proudly for years, was, well, what do you think the culture of policing is? Because the culture, as I experienced it and continue to witness, is what I just said. These are people who are committed to selfless service and sacrifice and running into danger and starting the breathing and stopping the bleeding. And these are people who show a high level of discipline and amazing judgment. And they're like, well, you have to admit there's some bad cops. And I'll say, sure. And you have to admit some planes crash, right? but we do not ignore the millions of planes that land safely, because sometimes a plane crashes. And you and I we do expert witness work. We look at some of the worst cases right across the country, and no one's ever going to have more of a front row seat to bad policing than we do. We see real life bad policing. And a prosecutor recently asked me, well, what percentage of the cases do you recognize excessive use of force? And I said, probably less than 4%. I mean, high 90% are fall within a reasonable range of decision making and performance, which is the legal standard. Cops have to be reasonable, and reasonable people can disagree. And so I was pointing that out, and he wanted to show that as my bias. Like, over 90% of the cases are reasonable. And so I didn't think fast enough on the stand. But like you do after you testify, you go back to bed in a hotel that night and you go, oh, I wish I would have said this. And here's what I reminded myself of that night. This prosecutor had access to every single police use of force in that jurisdiction. And I simply wanted to ask him, how many cops have you prosecuted for excessive use of force over the denominator of as many uses of force as in your jurisdiction? And the answer would have been much higher than mine. 99% of the cases he thought were reasonable, fell within a reasonable range. I didn't think of it fast enough, but that's the reality of policing. They're doing an amazing job every single day. And the anomalies stand out precisely because they're anomalies. So our leaders have got to do a better job of pushing back and saying, what you're describing does not reflect the reality of American policing. And if they don't want to go that broad, they can say it doesn't reflect the reality of our policing in our city. Because you remember the study when they asked, civilians, what's what is your trust in law enforcement as ranked among other professions? And law enforcement was still really high.
Yep.
But they would still, but you know what was higher than how do you rank the trust of law enforcement, which was pretty high, even at its worst political pushback. Our community still had a pretty high trust in
even at the worst, you can think about, we were 4th or 5th place of all industries.
Yeah. And then you ask them a next question. Well, how much do you trust your police? And it went up. Yeah. It was even higher trust in their local police because they personalized them, and what that to me reflected was how successful has the anti-police narrative been in influencing your trust in police versus your experience with police, right? If they relied just on their experience, it was going to be much higher. If they relied on the political narrative and the media narrative that was raging through our country, well, of course that's going to influence it. Which this goes again. We talked to chiefs about this when they were like, we need to build community trust. Individual officers need to engage in strategies to build community trust. And I always thought, well, one, what is your current level of community trust? You know, Thomas Sowell talks about that. It's community trust is not an actual thing, right? People trust you based on relationships you have individual to individual. But he says, even if you could find on one day in 1 minute some metric that accurately reflected community trust, you don't know which subset of the community you're talking about. It certainly isn't your entire community, but whatever it was, even within that subset, it's going to change within 1 minute, right? Yep. Within the next experience. And it's so fickle, and this was a leadership issue, that the best departments could have very good metrics of community trust because some of them were capturing metrics on car stops, right? With their little apps like, thank you, here's your warning. By the way, how would you rate this interaction? Which was brilliant because in those moments, they were being rated very high. So later someone would come in and say, you have a terrible relationship with your Hispanic community. And the chief would go, yeah, I don't think so. We've got pretty good metrics right here that show they have a pretty high trust. The problem with that was you can get one activist to stand on a podium provided by the media to say, you know, we thought we had a much better relationship with our police department, but this has destroyed community trust. And now we're back on our heels again. And I'm like, that just cannot be how we operate a police department.
It's so interesting you said all that because I'm in the middle of a research project right now, and I'll share this to you at length in a few weeks, I'm sure. But I've been going through about 2,000 police videos, not just the videos that show up on your algorithm, like diving deep, not, randomized, watching all of these incidents. And man, I've come across there thinking we're a lot better than even I thought, Vaughn. I mean, you talk about heroic stuff, and even going through there, you would have to almost try to find something being done wrong. And so it is amazing how the narrative is so much different reality. We are in this day and time where you don't have to believe me or Vaughn. Go watch the thousands of police videos dropping all over the country every week, right? I mean, if we're so terrible, where is it at? And I just think it's unfortunate because obviously there is a leadership issue that plays into fact. They've been doing studies for a long time and why people stay at their job. It all comes down to leadership and support, not salaries and benefits. That's important, but it's all leadership and support. And so I think from a recruiting standpoint, leaders have to get involved. You can't just sit back and let the recruiting officer do the job. There needs to be a figurehead giving assurance to people that are looking at your police department. And I think that's huge. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I have tried to frame these complex issues as simple as I could, even for chiefs, right? So you might have heard me talk about the concept of honest accountability. Like our police chiefs have got to demand accountability from their people. We all expect it. We don't carry guns and point them at people and not be, and by accountability, I mean, we have to explain why we did what we did, right? But if you want to hold somebody accountable and you want to a standard, right? There's two things that have to be present for honest accountability. The first is that the standards have to be clear enough that the officer can predict the lawfulness of their own behavior. So when we start to see minimum force necessary or last resort, it's like I've had people call and go, how would I know what that is? How would any officer know what the minimum force necessary is in advance of feeling resistance or observing resistive or pre-assault indicators. Like the feds have, I think, put it best. All we can do is have our entry point. It's an educated guess, right? When you talk about minimum force, but let's more broadly talk about any standard you hold officers accountable to. From a due process notice standpoint, they have to be clear. And by clear, it's not just clear in reading it. It has to be clear and then operationalized through training. And your chief has to be willing to stand behind those, because if you want to undermine morale, you have a chief of police who wrote a policy, supported training, and when the officer follows it, and this is happening in a lot of criminal cases for your audience, we have officers whose supervisors come in and say he followed his policy, he followed his training, he did exactly what we would expect him to do under the circumstances. And he's sitting there as a criminal defendant. And you know who's not on that stand testifying on his behalf? The chief of police. Now, recently in a case, the undersheriff came in and testified for his officer. The officer was still convicted. So we have that challenge, which is a little bit separate. But the leaders that we're finding, one, they have to make sure their policies and standards are clear enough, first on paper and then through training, that the officers can predict the lawfulness of their own behavior. The second criteria is the expectations on decision-making and performance can't be beyond human performance capabilities. And this is where we make our living. This is kind of our unique offer. If you're going to hold an officer or any human accountable to their decision-making and performance in a critical incident, you can't expect them to do things that no human can reasonably be expected to do. The problem is we don't know what humans can or can't do because we live our lives sort of educated by TV, right? We see gun draws where I just got to wait till you reach for yours and I can beat you on the draw, right? And some of that infects even our police leadership. They have ideas. I recently had to consult with a police leader who, in their policy, basically the police could not shoot somebody until there was an overt act, right? So if you're holding a gun and you've got the gun down by your side, they were required to wait till there was an overt act towards the assault. So I just pulled up my computer I had with me, and they hired us for this. So I love that they did this. This was actually a leader doing it right, like bringing you guys, educate me. And I'll quote what he says. I put it up. He looks at it, and it's an animation of action versus reaction.
Yep.
And following the animation, because words on paper, the research doesn't matter. They need to see it and feel it and hear how fast this stuff is. I show them a real world video that demonstrated the same concepts, where the officers actually get shot, one gets killed. And he's just staring with this blank stare because he knows what his policy says. He knows that he just terminated an officer for violating that policy after a shooting. And he's watching this and he goes, well, you just made me a liar. And he had been briefing the community on why that policy was important. And when he looked at that, he realized what we were telling him overtly, which is under your current policy, you're requiring your officers to be shot at a minimum 2 times before they can respond with reactive fire or responsive fire, if they can respond at all. And I made sure I said that because we have videos after videos of officers dying after the first shot.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and to you, I saw the look on your face, and to your audience who are probably sophisticated cops, they're going to find that to be ridiculous. The problem is whether it's your chief of police who doesn't understand the reality of human performance, or it's your investigators, because we try to get in front of all of them, it's definitely your jurors. It's definitely your judge. Unless, of course, your juror comes from an inner city culture of violence, they get it. They're some of our best jurors. Yeah. They're like,
they know
I would have shot him much sooner. Right?
Yeah.
They get it. But our judges, our attorneys, a lot of them have never seen the reality of human performance in a critical incident, its effect on memory, its effect on perception, its effect on decision making. They haven't seen any of it. And so they come in with expectations. Some of them come in with the best of intentions, and once you educate them, they get to the right answer. Others come in as reform activists. They hate the police. They're looking for their opportunity to hold cops accountable. They thought they finally have seen that. I wish when we come back next time, I'll be able to tell you about a case I'm currently sitting on. It exemplifies this perfectly. But the other thing our leaders need to remember is your cops are often put in positions where they only have bad options, and they have to make a decision among only bad options. And they're doing it without the benefit of an air-conditioned office and replay on their body cam, right? And so we're currently sitting on a case where, you know, it was just two things. Either there's a risk that the guy's going to die here. There's a risk that the guy's going to kill somebody here. There's a risk the guy's going to kill somebody down the road. But both of those risks are very real and they're very present. The officer decides, do I stop the threat now, or do I let it go down the road and hope for the best and maybe have to stop it later? And he made a decision. And so I look at that case and I was like, basically, dear chief, let's not forget, there's no good answer here.
Right.
None of us know what was going to happen down the street, and we still don't, because he ends up shooting the guy. But those are the kind of things that, you know, they come to us, and I'm like, and when you're talking to their leadership or you're listening to the investigators, you know, they have forgotten what it's like to be a cop. And you might know this. I mean, when you got into leadership positions, how long had it been since you put handcuffs on somebody, right? If you're a small agency, maybe you're still arresting bad guys. But most of the agencies, there's a point, even when you hit sergeant, you're not putting handcuffs on people anymore.
Well, no, I mean, I'll speak from experience. I spent 27 to 30 years supervisor and above, and 20 plus years middle management above. The departments are actually built to where you're not supposed to be at that level making those line level decisions. You have to actually work towards doing it. Like you have to say, I'm going to go to this training whether you let me to or not. I'm going to go out and work the streets today. I know you want me in my office. You have to make that decision to stay involved. Most people don't, and I don't fault them for that, but you get separated very quickly. And Vaughn, this all brings up one last question. I think it's so valuable. And we don't have many clients that push this, I don't think, enough, because I think it's so important. Because I believe the new generation of law enforcement, they want to be, like you've talked about, they want to be prepared, they want to be ready, they want to be trained. How much should we in recruiting be talking about the training we're going to give you? Now, of course, that's as long as we're giving them great training. But I think that should be promoted. Don't you think so?
Yeah, especially if you're giving them great training, because training is evolving right now. The training methodology, the science of learning. We have a methods of or advanced instructional methods class. It's our AIM course. A precursor to that was Chris Butler's great course, methods of instruction course. Those two classes, one from Chris, one from ours, actually complement each other. But the point is, we now have understanding and technology and research-backed training methods that are advancing cops much faster than they ever could have been before. Yep. Right. A lot of this stuff is old. It's just being repackaged and trying to finally push it into the system. But I think that's an incredibly valuable, here's what makes us different at our department kind of approach. Right. And it is a huge part of casting the vision, because, as you know, you can't cast a vision for somebody that all they can see is themselves drowning. You have to also show them the roadmap to get there, and to convince them, we're not throwing you into that deep water right away. That's where you're going to end up. And based on what I've seen about your history and your life and your attributes, you have everything we need to get you to that high elite level, right? Great communication skills. We love seeing that in you, and on, right? And your physical skills, that you're a wrestler or you play rugby or whatever, another great attribute. On top of your academic performance, all these things. Here's where we can see you, and here's what our responsibility is to get you there. We're going to get you there. And I just remember, whatever version of that, you have to think some of our most elite operators, and the ones I've come across, some of the most elite medical first responders passed out at the sight of blood the first time they got there. Some of the top medical critical incident response teams remember their first day at a mass casualty, where their supervisor was smart enough to say, here's your job, is to hold this bandage on this guy right here. Now, there's 100 other people that need assistance. Not your problem right now.
Yeah.
Right now, this is what we know you're capable of, and we're going to continue to build your confidence on. I might be digressing a little bit, but I think your point is, your agency has got to know what is the vision, what's the mission, what's the vision you're casting for them, and then also understand your own roadmap to get that person who's trusting you. When you say, I can get you there, you can lay out how we're going to get you there and the cool technology. And just for your audience, one of the funnest things I do is remind folks like the importance of visualization training, right? So I'll tell people, I can get you to sound and act like a veteran cop very quickly. Here's a series of books. They're called What Cops Know. And it's just one story of real copping after another, right? And there's detective versions, there's patrol versions, there's night patrol versions, but they're just real cop stories. What I want you to do is read that chapter, that story, and I want you to lay down and I want you to visual. I'll teach you how to get into like a self-hypnosis state, right? Just do some breathing, get into alpha state, right? And then I want you to visualize yourself going through that scene. I want you to see it. And if you start to get nervous, I'll teach you how to do self-arousal, like monitor your self-arousal and monitor and control your arousal states. You're doing that in your living room floor. And I remember doing this in 1993, reading, I don't remember what book it was, Be Your Own Bodyguard by Blower or something, or I don't know, Awaken a Giant with some book that convinced me that this is what elite operators were doing. This is what Olympic athletes do. If you want to be at the top of your game, injury-free, you adopt visualization. The funny part of this story is I had done 100 car chases in my head, talking about the traffic conditions and the speed and the weather and all the things that you're supposed to do, visualizing you're picking up the radio and putting it back and drumming your fingers so you're not tensing, all the things that they taught you. My very first car chase, dispatch calls me and says, I just want to tell you, she didn't know I was doing all that. She goes, you sounded like a veteran. That was better than I've heard our veterans in car chases. And I instantly knew, I was kind of shocked. I was like, well, this wasn't actually my first car chase, because I'll leave your audience with this. Your body doesn't know the difference between that which you vividly imagine and that what you actually experience. Right. And so we use that to our benefit in getting these brand new recruits where they need to be much faster. So yeah, if that's part of your program, share that stuff with them. Let them think they're Olympic athletes and elite operators right off the bat.
It's great stuff. Von Kliem, Force Science. Man, you're a legend in this profession. It's such an honor to have you here. I'm proud to call you a friend. Please come back, man. I mean, because every time you open your mouth, you're helping this profession, and that's what we want to promote. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, well, Travis, thanks for having me again. And I still think you and I need to get a road show at some point, because I love the work you're doing. And I think that's a 1-2 punch that would inject just so much enthusiasm back in and confidence back into the industry with some of these guys who are just, I say this is what you give these leaders. There's great leaders out there. You and I would walk in and we give them permission. We give them permission to say the things they know are right again. Right.
Yep.
So, hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, man. You've been watching, you've been listening. Thank you for doing that. We'll see you next week.